When I heard about the drama regarding the new ArtFight rule and the backlash they've been receiving, I was bracing myself for major disappointment. This is it, I thought. No ArtFight this year. We had a good run. I expected their staff's take to be some nonsensical garbage. After all, people on Twitter would never be mad for no reason, right? Anyway, upon tracking down and reading the actual rule, I found that personally, I thought there was actually nothing wrong with it. It did, however, give me an initial gut reaction of why it would be a problem for certain people. So I started looking into the whole discourse, hoping to find out what everyone was upset about, only to find myself face to face with the internet's worst enemy, reading comprehension issues.
Son, I want you to know, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.
I thought this was a standard case of people on Twitter, and no, I'm not calling it X, getting riled up over nothing, and thought they'd tire themselves out quickly. But the whole thing started getting out of control very, very fast. From people calling for boycotting of ArtFight to claiming this rule was exclusionary and ableist, which we'll get to. But the very existence of this telephone game that just made everyone even more confused made it obvious to me that we really needed to clear the air and explain what was actually going on, instead of repeating what someone else had chewed up and spat out at us. So, today, I'd like to go through this rule with you, break it down, and point out the huge inconsistencies between why people are mad and what the rule is really about. We'll also be covering some very important rudimentary art terms that are relevant to the conversation and which people are confusing for one another. Honestly, looking at the state of the art community right now, this feels like uncovering the ancient script just to prove to everyone that we've completely lost the plot. While you might have seen mentions of 3D and 3D models in this discourse, it surprisingly doesn't involve any actual 3D artists, so you lucky bastards get to sit this one out. I still don't understand how y'all are doing all of that, by the way, and at this point, I'm honestly afraid to ask. Still, even if this topic doesn't cover you personally, I think parts of this video will still be incredibly useful to you. These are some things that all artists of all skill levels should know.
And you should know this too.
So stick around for this sticky situation?
Who wrote this thing?
But before we begin, I want to make sure you know where I'm coming from with my takes. So let me tell you a bit about myself and my relationship with ArtFight and art in general. I'm mlekonya, but you can call me Milk. I make my living as an artist, and I'm someone who heavily participates in fandom and internet culture. I would even consider myself, in some ways, a content creator, since I enjoy tackling multiple forms of media and experimenting with my style and the themes I cover. I've been a Muppet, a detective, the lost right sock that's mysteriously wet after you found it again, and, relevant to today's topic, I've been around the internet for a while. I've been aware of ArtFight ever since my Google Plus days. Way to age yourself. And while I was lurking around from its very beginning, I only ever started participating in it a few years back.
5th year and counting, baby!
So for today's video, I'll just be focusing on this specific topic and no other ArtFight drama, as I'm not too familiar with the deep history of the website. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's look at the actual rule everyone is raving about. On their website, point number 5, under the section Upload Rules, ArtFight states that basis character creators and doll makers may be used for character images but must be credited. They may not be used for attacks. Under section A it states, this includes websites like PicCrew, HeroForge, video game character creators, and other doll makers. Under section B it states, this includes artwork traced from posable 3D models such as Clip Studio Paint, Design Doll, and similar programs, self-made bases, and photographs you have taken. We'll glaze over section A of the rule, as I feel we can all see why using and modifying someone else's creation for a submission in an art event in which the whole point is to make the art yourself would be a problem. Note, however, that the rule states that these are still allowed as character images and must be credited. Okay, now let's look at the second part of this rule again. This image comes from the user ver8370 on Twitter, who quotes it, then saying, "Whatever, ArtFight." This is where I started getting that gut feeling. I mean, this rule seems like a perfectly fine way to level the playing field, right? You would ideally want to regulate ways in which people could be exploiting the system and cutting corners. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I went into the replies wanting to see what it was people were so upset about, and oh my god, this took a turn I never expected it to in a million years. To say that I was disappointed would be an understatement. For this next section, I need you to listen carefully to all of the replies I'm going to read for you. Listen to what they're really saying. These are not cherry-picked, by the way, and most of them are together in the replies. Okay, now let's read them and see if you can tell me what's wrong with all of them. And yes, before you ask, this will be on the quiz.
As someone who's been in the industry since 2011, this is giving DeviantArt keyboard warrior vibes. The art community tried really hard to move past that, and I'm very upset to see it's not dead. Referencing is literally the industry standard for art creation professionally. Photographs you have taken is also taking me out. So many artists use photo bashing with their own pics for refs. It feels kind of ridiculous to disallow it. There's so much wrong with this rule that I question if the person who wrote it draws. This is some shit that 12-year-old who thinks referencing is cheating cooks up. Can't wait for ArtFight 2027 to be like, you may not draw. This guy used photographs as references. Boris Vallejo. Ever heard of him?
Huh? What was that? Okay, wait. Let's review the rule again. All together. This includes artwork traced from posable 3D models such as Clip Studio Paint, Design Doll, and similar programs, self-made bases, and photographs you have taken. So what exactly do all of these replies have in common? If you said the fact that none of these people possess any reading comprehension, you would be right! Yay! Because not only are they completely wrong and confused about the rule itself, they're also mislabeling what was being said. Nowhere in the rules does it mention that you are forbidden from using references.
You check in your rule book, but you won't find anything in there that says a dog can't play.
He's right! Ain't no rule said the dog can't play basketball.
This rule is exclusively about tracing your references, which I believe is a perfectly reasonable rule for an art event like this to have for the reasons we'll get into. Calling this rule something a DeviantArt keyboard warrior would do, and saying that it's comparable to the whole reference equals bad mindset is not even tangentially right, and it just shows the lack of willingness to introduce nuance into topics like these. I swear, the last time I was this disappointed in this community was when I heard y'all were bullying kids off the internet, and we'll touch on that later as well, don't you worry. Enough is enough. This is your wake-up call, so wake up! I also think it's important to mention that this conversation is getting muddied by memes and engagement bait as well, and some people are being purposefully coy and misunderstanding what's being said to feed into the drama. Obviously, no one here is saying you can't use references. Where does it say that? This is a conversation purely centered around tracing. There is a huge difference, and I'm about to explain to you why it's important to make this distinction and exactly what that difference is. But before we get into that, let's take a look at how this conversation unfolded on Twitter. An artist by the name of Fululu quote retweeted the original tweet saying,
Huh? Literal professional freelance and industry artists use 3D models. Are we so serious right now? I'll never understand the animosity towards artists that use legitimate tools. This is not doing the work for you. You still need to have a basic understanding of perspective, how to draw hair, clothing, etc. It still takes the same amount of work, but with visual assistance. Can we get with it, art community? Seriously, it's been decades.
And I have to say, after reading this, I sincerely believe that nuance is dead in this community, at least in big part. I really don't understand this compulsion to play dumb and act like a victim. Like, sir, no. No one is stopping you from doing art. No one has any animosity towards you. Where is this coming from? Where has anyone ever said you can't keep drawing? New ArtFight rules are so anti-art and holier than thou? Huh? Are we looking at the same thing? I swear, this whole conversation would be non-existent if the people online just had basic reading comprehension. Again, ArtFight never said you're not allowed to use references. You're not allowed to trace them. I honestly feel like I'm going insane reading these takes. But then I remembered what this is all really about. Tracing isn't referencing. These people are either ignorant or just refusing to admit that the only way these rules would apply to them is if they were outwardly tracing. I honestly feel like Fu's tweet was in very bad faith, and the rest of the conversation only echoes this. It reads as very defensive and is completely missing the point of the whole argument, which is that, again, at its very core, there is an important distinction between tracing and referencing. Words have meanings for a reason. Again, these concepts are not new. The people arguing against this are self-conscious to the point where, to them, taking away these practices that are well-known taboos in the art community for a reason is seen as animosity and elitism. On top of that, they're horribly misunderstanding what's being said and blaming ArtFight for it. ArtFight's wording on this is very precise and very deliberate. It's absolutely not their fault that someone can't comprehend something that was spelled out for them. They explained it plain and simply in terms any artist of any skill level should be able to understand. If you didn't, that means you either skimmed through it or you just simply don't know what these terms mean. And at that point, it's not up to ArtFight to explain themselves for your inability to understand them. They're an art event for artists. They're going to be using art terms.
Randall, there is a cow outside.
There's a cow farm. You're gonna find cows outside.
But hold on. Pump the brakes. That's a conversation for a later chapter of this video, and trust that we will be going back to this. I don't think their defensiveness is completely unwarranted and unreasonable. There is a very good explanation for it, and we'll tackle it later. Anyway, Fu's post blew up and naturally formed its own echo chamber. However, artists confused by the backlash did start trickling in and trying to clear the air. They pointed out the differences in question, but Fu and the others kept doubling down. One user named Tikiro Dragon wrote,
The thing is, you shouldn't trace it. Professional artists do use models, but not that way. Sometimes you just need a reference you can't find, so you use a 3D model as a reference.
To which Fu linked a video in response, specifically the Cafe Cuties Gwen splash art by Dave Cavez, claiming in a separate tweet that it was made using 3D tools. I watched the full speed paint for this video, and I wasn't surprised to find that Fu had, once again, either ignored or misunderstood the point being made completely. This was apparent immediately to the people who actually took the time to watch the video, who started calling it out in the replies. Namely, Dave Cavez, the artist who made the video, never once traces over the model. The model is only ever overlaid over his already completed sketch and toggled on briefly at a few points, long enough for him to check his work, at which point he resizes and transforms the already existing sketch and toggles the layer off. The video is extremely sped up, and even with that in mind, the full runtime of the video is 1 hour and 23 minutes. The 3D model is introduced at 4 minutes and 8 seconds, and I would have said that that was possibly hours of real time. But the video description actually gives us an exact number. This footage was sped up 40 times, and he says it took him 5 days to complete the thumbnails alone. The 3D model is introduced well after Dave had finished thumbnailing multiple rough sketches, picking a thumbnail, sketching out the original idea, figuring out the perspective, figuring out the composition, posing the character, blocking out the values, roughly doing the shading, and even starting to refine the sketch slightly. Dave also takes the time to meticulously pose the model by himself before he reintroduces it back into the drawing program to once again check his work. The 3D model is just used to observe, not to draw over, and he references it, he doesn't trace it. Oh yeah, it's also definitely worth mentioning that Dave is not only doing all of the fundamental work on his own, but he is also using Maya, an actual 3D program for the 3D model, which is going to be important in a second. Just this small section of the video is already clashing heavily with Fu's point, as their process starts with tracing the 3D model and completely leaning on it for fundamentals, whilst the Dave, who they claim should be used as the standard since he's a professional and professionals trace, had completed at least 5 other very important steps before this. The simple fact here is that they're using these resources in a very different way, and this is where the issues lie. If we're going to be very specific about using these professionals as a standard, then we should be specific about what that standard really is. It's also important to mention that you can't see Dave's external reference window anywhere on the screen, meaning that he's probably holding it open on a second screen like we mentioned earlier. It's not unusual for professionals to use a display like this to draw while their references are open on the side, and you can literally see him navigate Maya to edit the 3D model and the environment meticulously before having it disappear for huge portions of the video while he's making steady progress. It would be highly unusual for him to constantly take breaks to tweak little things about the pose and the background if he's not actively referencing it in that very moment as he draws. If you'd watched enough splash art speed paints or even used references like this properly in your life, you would know this. Other than using the 3D to check his work for the character, Dave does use the 3D model to also create an entire scene, posing background elements and playing with the perspective in Maya. What's important to mention is that he, again, does so meticulously from scratch. He heavily modifies and blends it into the image, handling the lighting and color, after which he paints over the image, making it completely his own. Do note that he's doing this because Dave intends to use the 3D model to incorporate it into the illustration, meaning that the use of the model will be important to the overall finished product by adding to it visually, not only as a guide. This is called photo bashing and is its own completely separate subject. To keep it short, I'll just say that photo bashing is an art technique in which you're intentionally using and keeping multiple existing assets in your final piece after heavily modifying them to the point where they're virtually unrecognizable as a standalone asset. Think of it like a digital collage. Nonetheless, it is still a separate, unrelated skill, and much like collaging and painting aren't the same thing, neither are tracing and photo bashing. I also watched Foo speed paint of their own art they provided, and out of what is nearly a 2-minute speed paint of their sketching process, almost 50 seconds of it are spent using the 3D model which they trace heavily. To be fair to them, this isn't a full speed paint or anything, so the runtime isn't comparable to that of Dave, but I'd argue we've seen enough to establish that Foo is tracing instead of doing some very fundamental parts of the typical art process, and overall using this as an example to prove their point when the video is right there for anyone to watch, and proves otherwise, is sincerely ignorant at best and dishonest at worst. This is just misinformation galore. To further drive my point of misinformation being spread, some people also brought up artists like Boris Vallejo and Alex Ross, and the same issue arises again when we look at their art process. Neither of these artists are tracing, they're using references.
Part, I had to figure this out a long time ago, and then with the photo reference taken, I could then jump into finally penciling it on the piece, which in this case, I did a transfer of my sketch drawing, which was tight enough as it was, blew it up to the size that I would want to paint on, and then I basically lightboxed that drawing of mine by going over my original drawing again, tracing it out at this size, and then taking the photo reference and sitting here and redrawing on top of the drawing I've already done, but going through and rebuilding the figure with new added details and dimension that I learned from the reference. When people often wonder, like, was everything you do just all reference? And the thing is, reference is only a part of it.
I'll include links to both of these videos in the description below so you can take a closer look at them and hear Alex Ross explain the thinking behind his process, but also break down exactly how he uses his references and why they're beneficial to his workflow. Again, using references is healthy and incredibly beneficial, but artists nowadays, especially online, are deeply confused about what it means to reference and what it means to trace. At some point, Alex Ross mentions that he uses lightboxing and projects his initial sketch directly onto a larger canvas once he's ready to refine it. But even that's not tracing, it's transferring. He still had to draw the illustration completely on his own. This is no different than using a new layer to draw over your already existing sketch, and then using a transform tool to make it bigger. All of this is why nuance is important in conversations like these, because no one is shaming you for using references, and in a community where people depend on one another for advice and learning, the spreading of misinformation could be really harmful not only to young artists, but also to beginners who'll find themselves not improving even after months or even years of illustrating because of it. I was a victim of this as a young artist myself. I didn't even dare touch references for years, and whenever I would reference anything, I felt like a complete fraud. Then, I educated myself, and I was shocked at how ridiculous and flimsy the whole argument against using references was. And now, many years later, I understand that the whole reason people were so against references in the first place was misinformation on their part as well, because they were also confusing referencing when tracing and copying. With that said, I don't think any of these people are ignoring the difference on purpose. I think they're extremely misinformed, and a lot of them are just repeating what they heard others say, which then causes even more people to hear about it briefly and accept it as fact. Twitter is infamous for being a very loud echo chamber, and there is a huge difference between popular opinions and facts. This is completely another case of people being defensive over something no one is attacking them for. I need you to understand that nobody here is faulting you for wanting to improve. If any of these people actually took the time to properly chew on what was being given to them, I'm certain they wouldn't have any issues with it.
Alright, come on, spit it out. Now, come on, spit it out. That's enough chewing. No, don't swallow it. No, you might learn something new. No, wait.
Baby.
Hey, waiter, can I order a nuanced conversation for all, please? And don't hold back on the nuance, but hold the literal thinking. Did I mention I wanted nuance? Before we get into this discussion, please keep in mind that this is a very nuanced conversation. I know art school isn't cheap, so I don't fault anyone for not knowing or understanding all of this outright, but if you're going to participate in these conversations, you should at the very least know what you're talking about. On top of that, the internet is free, and I believe these are some things every artist should know, so strap in because you're learning something new today. Hopefully. Hopefully this is new to you and you weren't just saying all of that on purpose to argue. Hopefully. Firstly, we need to keep in mind that there are 3 very similar concepts in art that people often mislabel and mistake for one another. And those are copying, tracing, and referencing, which I'm going to explain to you in detail right now. Copying could be defined as an act of directly using a subject, another art piece for example, to create a replica, a near replica, or heavily inspired imitation. Copying another artist is often used to study their style, technique, or at worst, to plagiarize. Copying from life is also a classical study method used by many art schools as the primary form of teaching classical art. Some ethical ways to copy from others include studies that are credited, done with permission, or even the modern age draw this in your style trend, in which an artist willingly provides an artwork that the art community could then replicate in their own unique styles, whilst keeping the theme and composition of the original mostly intact. This trend is still popular today and is used to celebrate milestones in artist journeys, though it's been elevated to where the copying isn't a necessary aspect of the participatory pieces. The general consensus for copying, however, is that it's usually unethical or unwanted by the majority of the art community, and that it's best if copied works are not shared, redistributed, or sold, though some artists might grant permission to be copied for studying purposes if asked. It's important to be mindful of individuals and always check whether or not you have explicit permission and rights to use someone's work for copying or study purposes. Though many would agree that copying is fine as long as the work is never redistributed or shared anywhere outside of your private collection. Some people even consider it a form of flattery that someone would want to learn off them as long as all of these other conditions are met and their original work is respected. Tracing is the act of drawing directly on top of your subject, including but not limited to an existing artwork and assets such as an image or a 3D model. When practiced mindfully and in moderation, it can serve as a useful method for studying art. Ethical tracing does exist and is used in the art industry, most commonly in the professional pipeline, especially and particularly where streamlining the workload is highly important. It is widely understood that this type of tracing is used exclusively in massive and demanding projects where the artist is required to work at a certain speed without compromising on the quality, or where it's necessary to keep the results consistent when splitting the workload amongst multiple different artists. Some of these projects include things like manga and animation, whilst in other cases, rather than being implemented into the finished product in any way, shape, or form, the traced artwork is in itself used as a reference. This can be seen in things like video game concept art. Note that tracing other people's artwork without permission is especially frowned upon in the industry, and that for these reasons, professional artists typically trace photo references or 3D assets they themselves created. However, most people would consider tracing outside of this professional setting to be highly unethical in the first place, with the biggest problems and controversy surrounding it being that it's most commonly used either deceptively, by lying or omission, as a form of shortcut, or a stand-in for important art fundamentals. Like I mentioned, tracing for studying purposes is most effective when used mindfully, in combination with other techniques such as breaking down the shapes and form of an object, rather than trying to perfectly reproduce it. Here's an example of proper tracing next to an example of tracing used as a shortcut. Note that when tracing to study, your goal isn't to create a finished piece, but rather to try and understand what you're drawing and reproducing. For the sake of comparison and fairness, I also included what ethical tracing of a pose looks like. This is how you would use tracing for studying. Unlike the example on the left, the way the person on the right uses the 3D model would not help them improve. Referencing is the practice of using one or multiple subjects as a rough guideline for your art piece. References can include all types of media, but for the sake of this discussion, we'll be focusing on visual media. So let's say it primarily refers to people's artwork, assets such as images and 3D models, and real-life inspiration. When using this method, the image being referred to would stand somewhere off to the side in constant view of the artist, while their empty canvas would be in front of them. Their drawing process would be physically unassisted by the reference image. This is why many modern-day artists prefer to have a second screen for references or use a pop-out window in their program of choice while working. Referencing is one of the oldest and most popular art practices and is an instrumental tool for artists of any skill level. It is also important to note that with referencing, unlike with copying, the finished product is visibly different from the referenced subject, typically by introducing multiple elements from different sources, modifying the piece to create a unique visual that stands independent from the referenced original, and letting the referenced images only vaguely influence and inspire the piece. Popular artists like J.C. Leyendecker use the references for their illustrations, and they're regularly used in the modern day by artists of all skill levels. Even though referencing is a lot more forgiving than copying, it's still important to make sure you're allowed to use certain images as references. Much like in the case of copying, heavily referencing other people's artwork and using copyrighted material as your reference could get you into some serious hot water, so be mindful of other people and what you're allowed to and not allowed to use. If you're unable to find a reference that suits your idea for a piece, creating your own reference is perfectly valid and even encouraged. Making the reference yourself gives you the time to really sit with your idea and understand what makes it work and what doesn't, which is experience you can take with you into your next piece as well, saving you a lot of time and trouble in the future. To avoid copying, use multiple references and treat them as loose inspiration, not as a strict guide. Here are some modern examples of what using a reference looks like. The piece obviously isn't traced over and the differences are apparent, yet you can definitely tell how having a visual aid assisted the whole process. Whew, that was a lot.
Stay with me, Cap. We've only barely scratched the tip of this iceberg.
This was just a rough explanation, so if you'd like me to explain these at length, with more visual examples and details, definitely let me know in the comments below. So, to recap, copying is making a direct or near replica of your subject. Tracing is drawing directly over a subject, either in part or completely. And referencing is having the subject off to the side and loosely referring to it whilst giving it your own spin. I found this incredibly useful guide by Chihiro Hove that visualizes these concepts perfectly. I'll just flash them on the screen briefly so you can pause and read them. So, how does this all tie into the ArtFight debate? Well, with all of this information in mind, if we take another look at the methods the people who have been complaining about the rule against tracing are using, we'll easily be able to spot the issue at hand. I'm going to point out the obvious and say that they have a problem with this because they, themselves, are tracing and misunderstanding the process as referencing. Now, hold on, before you fry me alive, let's look at the evidence we have. First off, tracing was never allowed on ArtFight. Regardless of what your stance on it is, this is a very well-known fact. Here's a visual guide on it directly from ArtFight themselves that mirrors our previous point perfectly. This was always available to anyone who cared enough to look for it, but people are careless and it's easier to complain than to actually check your homework. To put it simply, while all of the assets mentioned like 3D models, images, bases can be used as a visual reference if applied correctly, tracing over them directly is simply that, tracing, not referencing, which is different from copying, because while copying is replicating, referencing is loosely implementing the elements of the original inspiration and giving it your own unique spin. You are allowed to reference. Artists are encouraged to use references. You're not expected to magically be able to recall every little detail of something. Some people can do that, and it's called having a photographic memory, but it's generally understood that having something to look at takes a lot less mental strain than trying to recall it, especially because not everyone's memory is all that great, and a visual aid is a lot more reliable. People even use references when drawing their own OCs at times, even though they're the ones who created them. You should be focusing on trying to learn and apply what you're seeing in a productive way and practice that muscle memory, which is exactly what references are for. The problem with people complaining about the rule that forbids referencing right now is that all of them, and I mean everyone, is straight up tracing, something this rule has always applied to, and falsely labeling it as referencing. It doesn't matter how much you polish your work afterwards. Polish doesn't mean you're not tracing. You still are. Drawing directly over your subject is quite literally a part of your process. Even if you don't follow it one-to-one, that is quite literally what tracing is. I believe I already explained in detail what falls under the category of tracing, but just in case, one more time, for those in the back, you are using an asset which you are drawing on top of, presumably for the purposes of cutting corners to save yourself the time and the trouble of applying art fundamentals to that specific piece by yourself. That's what tracing is, and it's exactly what they're doing. Oh my god. Did you get all of that? Okay, good. I hope you're still with me, soldier, 'cause things are only about to get worse. I swear, some people heard the term ethical tracing and tracing for practice once and decided to run with it, to the point where they're ignoring the most basic practices in the art community and etiquette when it comes to art contests. Clowning on the ArtFight staff and calling them ableist, which again, we'll get to, don't you worry, when they're the only ones in this whole conversation actually using proper terms, are knowledgeable on the subject at hand, and are being very clear about it all, is honestly making my blood boil. They even go as far as creating proper visual guides that explain exactly what their stance on all of this is, that people were just too lazy to look up. So how can you say that they're being confusing? How is it that we've become so completely unable to think for ourselves to the point where everything could be served to us on a silver platter, but if it's not chewed up for us just the way we like it, we're going to refuse to even look at it? My intention here isn't to attack anyone. I hope that's not what you're getting from this. However, it's important that we have these conversations even if you're not comfortable with them. So take everything I say with a grain of salt and use critical thinking when approaching these topics. Okay, ready? Let's take a look at the official rule one more time, just to make sure we're on the same page. It's been a while. The rule itself states that you cannot trace directly over 3D models, bases, and images, whether they are self-made or not. And here are the ArtFight's official visual guidelines once again, for the sake of clarity. So, once again, to reiterate, using references isn't bad, but referencing and tracing aren't the same thing, and the ArtFight rule is specifically talking about tracing, not referencing. Mixing up those two very different subjects is really muddying the waters in this conversation, so I hope that by now, you know this.
I can't believe we're at Hogwarts!
No, that's Buckingham Palace. Hogwarts is fictional. Do you know that? It's important to me that you know that.
So, now that we finally have all of the definitions sorted out, and now that we know that what's actually being discussed here isn't the topic of referencing, but rather the topic of tracing, let's break down all of the arguments surrounding it. Let's look at this tweet by user SilkestMoth, who says,
I don't understand ArtFight folks sometimes, because it says that it's for artists of all skill sets, but then they say shit like this, knowing that using models and references is one of the stepping stones to doing that. It's important to remember that we're using the concept of tracing as practice in the context of ArtFight here specifically. SilkMoth is basically arguing that the rule against tracing 3D models would unrightfully make it difficult for some people to participate in the event. So, 3D models should be allowed because they're how beginners practice, right? This is where I have to admit something.
Throughout this video, I've been thinking about something that bothered me. At first, I took these artists at face value. After all, wanting to learn can never be bad, and should never be punished. Even if their ways of learning are a little misguided, the intention is still there, right? Right. Except, that's not what's really happening here. You see, I've been collecting some very interesting information throughout the video, little discrepancies here and there. But what did it all mean? I reread the same sentiments over and over again, but was I just stalling for time? I was poring over my script, thinking and then it clicked for me. Earlier in this video, I said I would address these concerns later. And now, the time has come. Once again, let's take a look at what SilkestMoth and Marco are saying here. Both of these tweets have something very interesting in common. That's that they're both indirectly insinuating and admitting to a very crucial fact here. For us to talk about this, it's important to keep in mind that the main point being defended here isn't about time saving, but specifically about tracing as a learning tool. Silk claims that telling artists to simply study anatomy proves that ArtFight is actually hostile towards inexperienced artists, because saying that they simply need to learn is inconsiderate of the fact that many of them are trying to learn through the use of tracing. It echoes the original tweet by Marco, but here's where things get interesting. Through saying that these artists are using these methods as stepping stones in a way where the banning of said methods would prevent them from participating in the event, you have just admitted that they've actually been a crutch as well. Is it clicking for you yet, detective? If not, let's work backwards to check our answer. Let me explain. Learning is like a journey, and the use of stepping stones is meant to aid you in that journey temporarily to make it easier for you. Simple enough, right? A stepping stone, however, implies that you should strive to ideally move past it. Are you still following? Because it's about to get tricky. If the use of tracing is simply there to assist you, and is ideally something you'd want to leave behind, then how is being unable to trace preventing you from participating? If you're truly studying, that means you would ideally strive to draw without tracing, and that you should want to practice doing so. If you truly possess the fundamentals you claim you do, and you're just tracing to improve them, you should still be able to draw even without the use of a base, even if the end result looks a lot more rough than you'd like it to. But why isn't it so? I mean, it was you who said that banning tracing is hostile toward artists of all skill levels. Why would you automatically come to a conclusion that these artists would have difficulties, or would be completely unable to participate without the use of tracing? The only reason this would ever be the case is if, to them, tracing is a crutch. Otherwise, banning tracing wouldn't have any real effect on these artists' ability to draw.
So you agree? Using 3D for tracing is a stepping stone and not something you'd ideally want to use in your finished artwork long term? Let's go back to this tweet just one more time. On the surface, I feel like Marco does have a good point here. Artists can, at the end of the day, use tracing to study, but context matters, and here's how the context of ArtFight changes this whole argument. Their claim is that tracing is necessary for some people to learn, but even if we can agree on that, doing studies and doing your regular work should be two completely different things. Usually, an artist would do studies, which is where the tracing can come in, from which they would take the knowledge that they would then apply into their regular work. You could argue that artists practice with everything they create, but isn't that true for everything? The more you do something, the better at it you'll become, no matter how slow the progress is. But doing it this way only helps you become better at tracing. It doesn't teach you how to actually apply the knowledge outside of it. Intuition and intention are also learned skills, and if you're taking those out of your process, then your work is going to suffer for it. On top of that, no one is mentioning that tracing is only helpful in studying if you actually do it constructively. Otherwise, you're just tracing. And this is even messier if we introduce the concept of customers or clients. If you were paying someone for their art, you'd be paying them for their skills. You would ideally want them to be able to execute what you're paying them for, and not for them to use your work as an experiment. Because if they're inexperienced with something, the end result would match the quality of the work they were being paid to do. This is why some artists are even hesitant to accept commissions surrounding certain topics, and why they don't feel comfortable drawing them. If a huge part of your work is assisted, you're not using your skills for it. If you're actually intending to study through your regular work, then it would be most productive to do what Dave Cavez and JC Leyendecker were doing. That doesn't mean you need to do a fully rendered study on the side before you even begin with your piece, but taking the time to break down different elements of the piece you want to tackle is tremendously important. Things like thumbnailing, collecting references, and even drawing out your idea roughly a few times before selecting a single sketch to refine can all tremendously help your process. It might even give you ways to push your idea even further than you could originally imagine. Slapping down a 3D model and getting right into it can really stunt your growth as an artist, even with references. Also, why do you think warm-ups exist? Because art is a learned skill. You're training your eye and your muscle memory to be able to translate your ideas smoother once you're ready to really get into it. Using a 3D asset for tracing is not a helpful method for really understanding what you're doing unless it's used in a very, very specific way, aka the studying methods we mentioned in the tracing section. You might feel like it's helping you because drawing quickly with better results can feel like you've improved, but when your speed and the quality of your work both depend heavily on the assets you're using, you're not really pushing yourself to improve. It's called pushing for a reason. You're making yourself do something you're bad at in order to overcome it and improve. To make this point easier to understand, let's use an example of drawing a human skeleton. And let's say you've never drawn something like that before, but you really want to implement it in your newest piece for whatever reason. Maybe it fits the character, the theme, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you want to draw it and you want to do it now. But since you've never done it before, you don't even have the slightest clue of where to get started with the drawing. So you decide that this is the perfect studying opportunity. You can then either A. Find different references of skeletons, which can include pictures of real skeletons, examples of how other artists tackle drawing them, or hell, even a little figurine of an anatomically accurate skeleton you just happen to have lying around. You take this reference you have gathered and do a few simple sketches on the side. You even find a 3D model. Look, I'm using an example you like. Look, pay attention, jingle, jingle. And put it on your canvas, breaking down its shapes by tracing over it directly, and then by looking at those simplified shapes, you try to replicate them on the side, unassisted. You can even pick one of the rough sketches you like as a base and try to refine it to gain more understanding of your subject, though it's not necessary. You then get into the main drawing and either implement the unassisted sketch you already have or simply draw it again with the knowledge you've just acquired. You then proceed with the rendering, referring back both to your sketch and the reference you've gathered for assistance until you have the finished product. Or you take a reference you randomly found or simply look up a 3D asset in the Clip Studio Paint store, fiddle with it for 30 minutes to get the desired angle, perspective and pose, slap it onto your canvas, and instead of trying to understand how it works, just immediately trace over it directly, and that's it, you're done. For bonus points, you can be as loose as you want with this part, just to introduce some human error in the piece and make it look more organic, because we all know that following the model too closely makes everything look stiff. Did you spot the difference yet? I know it can be tricky, so let me point it out for you. One of these methods is studying and understanding what you're doing, and the other one is a shortcut, something that helps you get your results quicker with little to no effort in comparison, and that's not studying and figuring things out. Drawing anything for the first time is scary, and you're expected to suck at it if you've never done it before, and I understand the impulse to just rush through all of your mistakes and flaws, but by trying to skip out on the part where you're letting yourself make the mistakes, you're not really learning anything.
But Milk, it still takes understanding anatomy to pose the model.
And to that I say, I guess? But only to the point where if you've ever seen another human being, you can probably tell that limbs aren't supposed to clip through each other.
But you really need to know how angles and perspective work in order to position your model.
No, you really don't? Like, y'all do realize that we also have access to these tools, right? I can literally go into Clip Studio Paint right now, take a model, rotate it in a random direction, and then zoom in to increase the intensity of the angle if I want to get freaky with it, and voila! That's where my efforts of figuring out that angle would end. It didn't take any special knowledge for me to do this. Are we being serious right now? I'm of course saying all of this with an assumption that these artists are being genuine when they're saying they think this is helping them improve. But let's tie this back in with the topic at hand. When it boils down to it, ArtFight isn't obligated to accommodate your methods of practicing in an event specifically made for showing off your art skills. You can still choose to use the 3D models on your own time, but ArtFight is in no way responsible for accommodating your means of improving when the goal of the event is to showcase your skills, not practice. I know people are up in arms because it feels like this rule is about more than just ArtFight. It feels like this is ArtFight making a stance. But even if it was exactly that, they have every right to do that? ArtFight is an art contest with its own set of rules set in place to keep the contest fair. It's an event, aka a special occasion, in which a specific set of rules applies. They're not the authority on what you can and can't do in general. If they randomly decided to ban the color blue in their event from now on, they would have every right to do that. But that wouldn't mean that you're banned from using the color blue for life. This is obviously a very silly example. There's no reason why ArtFight would ever do this, but I'm just trying to make my point here. They're not the authority on art in general, but they are the authority on what they want to and don't want to deal with in their own event. And if you're really tracing purely for educational purposes, then, again, this rule wouldn't hinder you in any way, shape, or form. You should still be perfectly fine and able to participate with your art skills intact. There's quite literally nothing that's stopping you. In fact, shouldn't ArtFight be the perfect opportunity and excuse to test out your skill and see how that practice you've been getting in is working out for you? If you show up to a race with a bike, and the rest of the people are gonna be running, and then the event organizers tell you, hey, no bikes. They're not banning you from the event. They're saying you can't use that specific method if you wanna participate. If you then complain to them about how that's unfair, saying you just want to use the bike because you want to practice building up your stamina in the race, they still have the full right to refuse, because at the end of the day, this is a road running race. It doesn't matter what you're using it for, a bike is still a bike and running is running. And does this mean you're not allowed to ride a bike ever again in your life? No. But if this is really about the race and not about your bike, then drop it and run with the rest of us, damn it. And if you're not fast enough in the race because you haven't been preparing for it properly, then you can't blame the organizers for it. You only have yourself to blame. And this isn't even a comparable metaphor, because unlike with road running, art is a learned skill that's available to everyone. I can't believe that in the day and age of AI, when we're constantly having a conversation of anyone can draw, pick up a pencil, people are saying that they would be unable to do so if their tools were taken away. Like, where are you getting this from? Who said that you're not allowed to participate just because you've used a 3D model to practice? Just don't use them for this. If it's just practice, you don't need them in every piece. And if you do need them to be able to draw, then just admit you've been using them as a crutch. I don't think there's any shame in that, but I'm tired of pretending that the difference is non-existent. If you can't draw without a 3D model, that means that your art skills are obviously lacking. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame in not knowing how to do something. Just be bad. Where is all of this coming from? Now, let's finally address the time-saving argument, aka saying that tracing a 3D model just helps you save time, but you're otherwise perfectly fine and able to draw by yourself. Let's take a look at how that actually works. Tracing as a time-saving tool is seen as justified because the claim is that you're just skipping tedious work. But isn't that something you shouldn't really do when it comes to fundamentals? Time-saving tools are something more akin to a brush. Using a foliage brush instead of drawing each individual leaf on a tree can save you a tremendous amount of time. This is a valid time-saving tool, and you still need to have an understanding of how to use it in moderation for it to make sense in the end product. Otherwise, if you just stamp the brush and call it a day, you will get a really clanky result. Let's put the brush example against the 3D model used for tracing. The brush might save you the time of creating the illusion of a texture and help you achieve the detailed effect in a very short amount of time, but it still doesn't resolve the fundamentals for you. If you don't know how to then take that brush and apply shading, highlights, and even additional texture to it, the end result would be more of a stamp than anything else. The same can't be said for the 3D model. While you would still go in and do some post-processing work like rendering and adjusting your art after you're done tracing it, the 3D model you're tracing is almost always already shaded for you, and the perspective and the body proportions are resolved for you just by you positioning the model. This is why it's an incredible thing when used as a reference, but by tracing over it, you're just adjusting something that was already done for you, instead of applying any kind of knowledge. But we're not even talking about intricate detailing here, we're talking about the basics. Things that every artist should understand. When people skip over fundamentals and trace instead, others feel that the amount of work they're putting in and the result they're getting simply don't align. To some, it feels like they're misrepresenting their current abilities, which is one of the biggest problems people have with tracing in general. It feels like the results achieved by tracing are unearned, especially when it's used as a replacement for something that's supposed to be the foundation of your work. If the goal is simply to skip the work and reap the benefits of the speed and ease at which you're pumping out the result, we're getting into some seriously muddy waters. Because isn't one of the biggest excuses AI bros use to brag about their slob that AI did it in seconds while you took hours? AI is just a tool. It still took me a lot of work to put it all together. And I just need to make it clear, because I know some people will try to twist my words. As long as you're drawing in any capacity, you're already light years away from anyone that uses AI. But it's exactly for that reason why you should be mindful of what you're saying. Can't you see how this could be a bad look? But even if this is really about speed, then let's look at what that means in the context of ArtFight, which is why we're here in the first place. First off, let's ask ourselves why you'd feel the need to be quick in this specific situation. Well, to put it simply, if you get points every time you submit art, and the amount of points you get depends on the quality of your work, the best way to benefit in an event like this would be to cut down on the time whilst preserving the label of high quality on your work. Now, quantity and quality aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but it would be a lie to say that in a lot of cases, focusing on either one of them doesn't compromise the other. This is just an expectation with human work, and usually the gap between the two is closed with practice and experience. These artists, however, have found a way to get both by cutting corners, and here's why that's a problem. Just because it would benefit you, it doesn't mean it's morally right, especially not when we're talking about a competition. Looking for loopholes and cheating the system is something every art event has to deal with, and ArtFight is no different. Because of this, they've always had rules that follow basic art etiquette in place. They're very intentional and protect the fairness of the event by penalizing practices that could potentially be predatory and exploitative of the system. This isn't done out of spite or pettiness, but because the staff had possibly recognized how these practices could be predatory and exploitative in challenges like this one, and can very easily turn into point farming. I sincerely thought that this was common sense, and it's so confusing how people are even coming to the conclusion that they're being anti-art when they're simply looking out for the artists that are participating and trying to make things fair. But there's actually nothing wrong with wanting to learn speed, so let's take a look at how you can actually improve and work faster. First off, speed isn't about skipping fundamentals. Quite the opposite. It's about minimizing your mistakes by tackling them head on. Drawing fast isn't about being physically quick. It's about making sure you're not backtracking all the time. Getting stuck on simple things takes away from your process instead of letting you focus on refining it. This is why things like studying the fundamentals is crucial. Having a solid base to work off of saves you insane amounts of time in the long run, but not when that base comes at the expense of your artistic abilities. Prep work and using references is also incredibly important. It allows you to avoid spending energy on recalling things out of thin air, and lets you focus on actually creating. The absolute biggest way to actually improve and save time is to learn the fundamentals, and I do want to briefly touch on what that actually means because people like throwing it around at beginners without actually taking the time to explain them and why they're helpful. I'm not going to go into this too deeply because this video is already long enough, but here we go. First off, I want to mention that the idea that learning just boils down to grinding and that it's reserved for you only if you want to be a professional is baloney. The point of art is learning how to do it, preferably without the urge to piss your pants every time you pick up a pencil. So studying is, in fact, very important to artists of all skill levels. The gratification of having a complete finished work you're proud of completely hinges on all of the hard work you put in to get there. Allowing yourself to learn is allowing yourself to prosper as an artist. Okay, so, since this video is already 50 years long, let's focus on the fundamentals we need for this context only. All you need to keep in mind is shapes and form, perspective, and basic anatomy, since they're most commonly neglected when 3D models are used to trace. And here's the most beautiful thing about tackling them. They all tie into each other. Learning how basic shapes and form work can help you draw virtually anything ever. If you learn how to do this, you'll be able to break down almost anything into smaller, simpler shapes that are easy to understand and reproduce by hand. If understanding form is understanding how simple shapes make up a whole, perspective is then learning how these shapes behave in a 3D space. Something like basic anatomy can be combined with these principles and be a great way to test your knowledge of them. These methods are where tracing could even be useful to you, as long as you practice it in the aforementioned ways. And voila! There you have it. You just studied the fundamentals. That's it. That's all it is. Now you just have to do it over and over again, and bit by bit you'll be able to stand completely on your own. It's not nearly as difficult as people claim. If you practice for a while, you'll begin to notice patterns and you'll build a natural instinct on how to approach almost anything in your art, even if you've never drawn it before. Time is your friend, not your enemy. Allow yourself to sit with your skills and examine where you really stand. I am slow. I'll be the first to say it. I have trouble staying on track and tackling certain things in my art, and I understand how these things can be frustrating, but I promise you, if you tackle them at least once, it'll be like a huge weight was taken off your shoulders. By practicing this way, you're also learning intuition, intention, and muscle memory, which will allow you to free up the time you've been taking up on crawling through them and give you more time to focus on other aspects of your art you've been trying to skip to this whole time. Also, I'm just gonna point out the obvious and say that people are calling drawing anatomy tedious and time-consuming, and then spending hours of fiddling with a 3D model that's not even going to appear in the final piece to save time. You're spending extra time to save time, instead of just learning how to actually save time. Which is honestly a little silly, so my biggest advice here would be to pick your battles wisely. If you're willing to spend all of that time over and over again as a result of you refusing to learn, then you're not saving time anymore. You might as well just sit down every once in a while and learn, instead of pouring in so much time and effort into something that's stunting your growth. As the old saying goes, man,
To
fish,
You give him.
fish,
you give
man.
him
I don't know. Let's say that you've been shaking your fist at me this whole time saying,
Tracing 3D models isn't bad. Professionals do it all the time. It's an industry standard.
and this argument seems completely valid at first glance, right? After all, if something is a standard in the industry, why shouldn't you be able to use this very valid technique? Well, here's the thing, and I'm going to hold your hand when I say this. When you're competing in ArtFight, you are not a professional artist in the industry pipeline, and I cannot stress this enough. Tracing is a tool like any other, but just like any other tool, it can be used both in good ways and bad ways, and the context for where and how it's used matters. So let's take a look at the use of tracing by professionals. The reason professional artists use tracing and photo bashing to save time is because they need to pump out copious amounts of work at an insanely high quality constantly, because it's something they're quite literally getting paid for, and because a lot of other people depend on their ability to produce results quickly in that situation. On top of that, 3D models are used to save time on parts of the work that aren't actually explicitly getting paid for. For example, if an artist is paid to design an outfit, there's no need for them to draw a new base for it over and over again, and waste time on something the company they're working for isn't going to use. Tracing to save time in this case is something born out of necessity, and even then, not everyone does this, and a lot of professionals don't actually enjoy it, as this type of work can feel very impersonal at times, giving them a feeling of being a cog in the machine. I also saw someone mention that Norman Rockwell was using tracing because he projected the photographs he took onto his canvas, and this is where I'm just going to point out that Norman Rockwell was, in fact, a cog in the machine as well. He worked primarily on magazine covers and was a professional illustrator with tight deadlines. You, on the other hand, are not a cog, and there is no machine. When you're participating in ArtFight, you're not working for a company that's paying you to do it, and you're not going to be losing money and holding anyone's project back if you're not pumping out your art fast enough for this event. And besides, just because this practice exists, it doesn't mean that it's a standard. Just because a few people practice it in specific circumstances, that doesn't justify the use of it everywhere. Artists like J.C. Leyendecker, who I've mentioned earlier, did insane amounts of studies before they even started on their work. And he was also someone who worked in an industry pipeline, and also someone who designed magazine covers. Yet, he was always still willing to put in the time to assure the quality of his work. Just because a few people practice it in specific circumstances, that doesn't justify the use of it everywhere. There is no need for you to treat individual illustrations you have complete control over as though you're creating in a professional pipeline, and if you still want to do this for no reasons other than your own free will, please remember our previous point and acknowledge that this is something ArtFight doesn't have to accommodate you for. In fact, they shouldn't accommodate you for it in an art event where working like this could obviously cause a problem, because you would be farming points. Using these tools at the end of the day gives you an unfair advantage over others, which is in fact not in the spirit of the event. It's never been. Even then, ArtFight doesn't exclude your works if you choose to do it in your own time. They recognize that you might want to use a base to save time for purposes of creating references and designs and getting your idea across quicker, much like something a professional would actually use the 3D work for. That's exactly why the use of 3D models, bases, and even dolls in this way is completely allowed in character images. The rule specifically outlines this, stating, bases, character creators, and doll makers may be used in character images. If you actually cared about this, you'd take the time to try and understand the difference before attacking people. Keyword for this video, nuance. Why are we pretending like words and terms mean nothing anymore? If you don't have the patience and the basic reading comprehension to sit down and understand what this rule really means, and then you start broadly gesturing at it, claiming it to be something that it's not, you're being careless at best and ignorant at worst. No one is faulting you for not being well informed, but if you're going to be participating in this conversation and attacking people, then you should at the very least know what you're talking about. Educate yourself. If you're trying to defend your use of tracing on your own time, this isn't the time nor place for that. ArtFight has still always been very inclusive for artists of all mediums, and there's no reason why that wouldn't include you. This conversation is about art practices within the context of an art event. If this is the hill you wanna die on, then so be it. But there are actual reasons for why this wouldn't be allowed in an art contest, and you can't keep ignoring that if you're going to keep inserting yourself into the conversation. Stop chewing your pencils and open your ears! And if we're going to be talking about this in the first place, then let's address another contradiction that's come up in this conversation. The end-all be-all defense these artists love using is,
just let people have fun.
And I have to say, This is such a lazy and careless argument that falls apart the moment you actually think about it for more than 2 seconds. If this is about having fun, then doesn't that mean you wouldn't necessarily care about what tools you're using? If you like drawing and enjoy the process, then how is cutting down on that process fun? Sure, there's that whole joke of,
I draw for a living. Like, I draw and I do art and I paint and it's the worst fucking thing ever and I hate it and I hate art and I hate me and why can't I draw right ever? This sucks. I hate art. Fuck art. Fuck you.
you do realize that this is something everyone has to deal with, right? We're still choosing to do it because it's still fun despite it being hard, and sometimes even because of it. Besides, are you really having fun? If you're just trying to get better results quicker, that sounds like you're skipping the part that's supposed to be what's fun. You know, experimenting and learning something new. Art is a learned skill. The fun in art has always been about the effort and the work you're ready to invest, not the results. You wouldn't say, I'm having so much fun with this finished piece. You would say, I had so much fun working on it, meaning that the action of the drawing is obviously what's fun. The drawing is the aftermath. The whole point of being happy with your result is being able to look at it after the time you had to sit with it, invest your blood, sweat, and tears, and seeing all of your efforts pay off in the form of a finished piece. Otherwise, if this was just about getting better results faster, why not skip the process altogether? Like, I'm so confused about where you're coming from with this one. Is the fun of creating not what it's always been about? How can you claim that you're just having fun and then in the same breath say that you're trying to save yourself the trouble? Cherry picking for the sake of your argument only goes so far when you actually sit down to have these conversations. If the argument for some people is that the process being easier makes it more fun, I can see why they'd want that. But doing it this way isn't even the best way to make it easier for you to draw. You're just getting all tangled up in something you absolutely don't have to do. If you really cared about making this easier on yourself, you would know that the best way to do this is to study. And I really don't want to hear an excuse of artists being at different skill levels, because here's the honest truth. Art is a learned skill, and your skill level depends solely on you. That's it. None of the artists you look up to were born with magic hands. People are simply better at something the more they do it. If you're just there to skip the process and reap the benefits, that sounds like dopamine chasing, and is again seriously close to the whole conversation surrounding AI. And speaking of that, using broad terms like just let people have fun is a very slippery slope. Saying it is just a tool that exists in a program to be used and asking how it's wrong to use a tool provided for you, doesn't this whole argument sound a little too familiar to you? Is this not exactly the type of argument AI bros use? AI is just a tool. How is it wrong of me to use AI features when the program I'm using is offering them? It's a one-to-one. Obviously, I'm not saying that we should compare people who use AI to real artists, but they certainly will. And these talking points aren't helping. Again, this is why you need to think about what you're saying. Nuance is crucial in these conversations, and if you're asking these questions carelessly, then don't be surprised if people actually push back or use them against you. Be mindful of what you're saying. You know what they say, play stupid games, win stupid fishes. When it comes down to it, I honestly think this is a case of people feeling really self-conscious about not being a quote-unquote real artist. And the amount of anger and backlash ArtFight has received only reflects that insecurity. The most jarring thing about this is that the way these people are defending their use of quote-unquote references makes it seem like they're instrumental in their process. If you're saying that you're unable to draw without a 3D model you can trace, then you're long past the point where you're using the model for studying and at the point where you're just using it as a crutch. If the problem for you is not being fast enough to draw everything you want to draw and that bothers you, then you should work on finding ways to make that process quicker for yourself without leaning so heavily on what is, again, a crutch. But saying that this is going to isolate a big part of the art community is just simply not true.
But Milk, tracing is what's fun for me.
And to that I say, yeah, okay. That's fine. It's fine to be a hobbyist, it's fine to draw for fun. Hell, if you draw with a stick in the mud, it's fine. I recognize that. I myself have traced memes for fun. But that's not my point. How you trace and what you use the traced art for is important. I'm talking about time and place. It's possible I'm not even referring to you here. Use critical thinking and take this with a grain of salt. See which category you actually fall into in this conversation. One specific argument I've seen people use to criticize this rule was mentions of aphantasia, and how people with aphantasia wouldn't be able to participate because of it, which we'll get into now. For reference, aphantasia is the inability to voluntarily visualize mental images. Close your eyes and try to imagine an apple right now. Can you see it? What color is it? What's the detail on the apple? Can you make it rotate in your mind? If you answered no to all of those questions, you might have aphantasia. Here's a little visual representation for you, just in case you can't imagine it. I got you. So, at first glance, all is well, right? I mean, you can see how this could possibly impact your ability to draw. Not being able to imagine what you want to put on paper must suck, right? And it does, but not in the way you might think. So, I was actually familiar with aphantasia prior to this, and I have to say, when I heard people were using it to claim that the mods were ableist, I felt a physical ick. This felt particularly wrong to me, not only because they seemed to fundamentally misunderstand what aphantasia is, but because aphantasia itself isn't even considered a disability. And everyone who was defending them simply went along with whatever they were saying without even checking if they were making sense in the first place. I felt like this was really disrespectful to actually disabled people, and accusing someone of ableism isn't a small thing either, so this was all in very poor taste. On top of that, they were pulling some of their claims out of thin air. People were claiming that due to them living with aphantasia, this rule would make them completely unable to participate in ArtFight. They claimed that without tracing their references, they just wouldn't be able to draw. And this is where I, again, have to mention the problem of reading comprehension this community has. I'll repeat, once again, that references are not and have never been forbidden in ArtFight. Tracing them is, and if you still don't understand the difference between the two, refer to the second chapter of this video.
But doesn't this mean that people with aphantasia wouldn't be able to use references regardless?
Well, no. Like we said, aphantasia hinders your ability to voluntarily visualize mental images, meaning that you can't conjure images in your mind. However, this does not in any way physically prevent you or hinder you from visualizing the things around you. It's just that you can't imagine a purple elephant if I was to tell you to do it right now. You'd understand the idea of an elephant, you'd understand the concept of the color purple, you just wouldn't have an image physically flashing in your mind when someone says it. You might already see where I'm going with this. Just because you can't imagine a purple elephant, that doesn't mean you can't look up an image of an elephant and use it as a reference, and then color it purple. And this is something all artists do regardless of whether or not they have aphantasia. We already discussed how using references takes away from the mental strain of trying to conjure an image in your mind. It's easier to already draw what's there, and since aphantasia doesn't impact your ability to perceive things, only to recall the visuals or conjure them out of thin air, if you still have issues with drawing even though you're looking at a reference, that's not an issue with aphantasia, but with your drawing skills. How do I know all this? Well, you see, my own partner, who is an artist, has aphantasia, and his work is that of an industry-level professional. In fact, many professionals actively working in the industry have spoken about their experience creating with aphantasia, and all of them expressed that this was something they only learned later in life, once they've already been drawing for a while. The only reason I'm mentioning professionals in this context specifically is because in the industry, the stakes and the standards are higher, and if there are artists with aphantasia that are not only able to draw, but also perform at an above average level, there is, again, nothing that's stopping you. And I'm a milk who does my own research, so I also went on a lot of threads to see how people with aphantasia talk about their condition. One sentiment that they all share is that they were actually surprised to hear that not everyone else sees the world the way they do. Also, their art is not lacking in any way because of their condition. They're still perfectly fine and able to create. Anyway, what did we learn? While living with aphantasia offers you a unique perspective, it doesn't necessarily do so in a negative way. If anything, this is a fantastic opportunity for you to learn. I also heard one person mention that they can't draw without tracing because they have issues with depth perception. And I was really curious about this because when I first heard about it, my gut reaction was, wait, wouldn't that make it easier to translate 3D objects into 2D space? And guess what? I was right. It took me less than 2 minutes to look up what they were talking about and find that not only would this not hinder one's ability to draw, it could even be considered an advantage, or as a lot of people called it, a creative edge. While these artists can't perceive depth in a traditional sense, they can still see shadows perfectly fine, meaning that they can distinguish between different values and planes of an object by observing its shadows, which would allow them the ability to mimic that 3D space. Some artists you might have heard of that couldn't perceive depth include, but are not limited to, Marc Chagall, Man Ray, Pablo Picasso, Edward Hopper, Gustav Klimt, Willem de Kooning, and Roy Lichtenstein. I feel like looking at their art is so interesting because you can definitely tell how this condition possibly influenced their art style, but that had nothing to do with their ability to create otherwise. I'll just mention that we don't really know the people who are talking about this, so it's ultimately important to take all of this with a grain of salt. But I've also seen other people who shared their conditions confused by these sentiments. Again, I do want to note that we don't really know these people, but the things they're saying just aren't adding up to the mounds of evidence we have for these conditions, and the experiences that are otherwise all very uniform. At the end of the day, we don't really know their situations, so take everything I said with a grain of salt. For all I know, they could be a complete alien with an exception to everything I just said, and if that's the case, then this doesn't apply to them. But as things are right now, the ableism argument is simply inexcusable. You can't throw such a serious accusation at someone and then dip and expect no pushback. And no, calling them out isn't in itself ableist. Disabled people aren't helpless little babies. They don't need you to come out and defend them, and they're also not immune to criticism. There is one simple fact here. You weren't discriminated against. There's no reason why you still can't participate in this event. I honestly can't believe that people are so ready and willing to be victims, especially when it comes to something like art. Art has always been about overcoming hardships and obstacles. There are so many artists out there who have created with or in spite of their conditions and hardships. You have people creating with their feet, mouth, suffering from chronic pain, being half blind. Are you seriously gonna act like anyone is clipping your wings right now? What happened to the indomitable human spirit? What happened to fighting through hardships and coming out the other end winning? This mindset where your first impulse is to lay down and roll over just makes me so depressed. Despite the state of everything that's happening right now, I promise you the community has your back. Get out there and try something new. Study, put your work where your mouth is. This conversation has never been about the results and always about intention and effort. I can't believe what it's come down to. Also, let me point out that the artists with aphantasia and artists who have issues perceiving depth that we mentioned are just examples of famous people. Who knows how many other people with these conditions were out there creating beautiful things that just never got their time in the spotlight. So this is my open invitation to you. If you have either of these conditions, or any condition or disability that could hinder you as an artist, but you're still creating nonetheless, please share your stories with us. Tag me in the comments or your post and I'll share your work. Because y'all absolutely deserve the applause. Let's show that you're absolutely perfectly capable of creating in spite of your hardships, because I know you are, and I believe in you. If you're a beginner, a young artist, or simply someone who enjoys doing art in general, I need you to know that you're doing great. In today's day and age, we're flooded with AI slop, people scamming, stealing, undervaluing us, and I need you to know that if you're still drawing despite it all, despite of life getting in the way, I think you're incredible. No one ever said this journey will be easy for us, but God, is it hard. As someone who does their own stunts, I can be the first to confidently say that I've been through the trenches. I was there when it was considered unethical to use references. I was there when specific art styles were ruthlessly mocked and deemed lazy and cringed by the internet. I was there through numerous algorithm changes across many platforms. And finally, I am now here through the rampant age of AI. Back then, in the actual days of DeviantArt keyboard warriors, the actual elitists, I was a beginner artist, and I can say with absolute certainty that at the root of it all, these things really stunted my creative growth. Nowadays, much like a snake eating its own tail, this whole discourse is starting to circle back to its primitive beginnings. If you've been in this community for long enough, you could actually feel the lack of nuance chip away at the conversation, until the importance of these topics just boiled down to this good, that bad, and became very black and white. People are either being hyped up for some really questionable things or not being given the benefit of the doubt anymore, purely depending on which of these two crowds the algorithm finds first. I feel like both sides of the discourse are approaching one another in very bad faith. And it's impossible to have these difficult conversations without pointing out the reason for why these artists feel the need to feel defensive about their practices in the first place. So here it is. Beginner artists are ruthlessly attacked and shamed for being beginners, and some are even bullied off of their respective platforms for good. I'm honestly horrified and disgusted at this behavior, and I am aware that a lot of the people doing the bullying aren't artists themselves, but we need to do better as a community and uplift these artists when others are putting them down. Whenever I see a beginner artist online, I instantly have so much love and respect for them, because guess what? I've been there. We've all been there. I know how scary it feels to post when you know you're not that good, and I know how rewarding it feels to be praised for it anyway, praised for trying, for doing it. Over the years, there's been this subtle shift happening in the art community where it's become normalized to bully and harass people just because the internet finds it funny, and I've seen it time and time again. If some young and impressionable artist is being put in a situation where all of their fears are confirmed and where the natural imposter syndrome all artists feel suddenly becomes something tangible to them, of course they will try and hide their flaws by taking all these shortcuts, and then by the time they've grown as an artist and as a person, they might have already gotten so used to these methods that without them, they don't have confidence in their art skills anymore, because they never got to build them. On top of that, the use of these methods was only reinforced by the results they give. Social media has made people think that you need to work faster to succeed, and you kind of do. So they take shortcuts to create faster, and it worked. They'd be able to keep up with the algorithm that rewards quantity. So how can we blame them when their behavior was reinforced and rewarded every time they did it? They were just doing what they could to exist and create on the internet. But there's so much discussion around these practices for a reason. Algorithms are inherently very anti-art. We constantly see artists putting copious amounts of effort into their work only for it to then be falsely flagged or taken down or stolen or reposted without credit or even just completely left in the dust under piles and piles of memes and trends. Artists are forced to become this weird sort of mutant of artists and content creators and keep up with these weekly trends with their really high quality work, lest they get buried again and their account dies. And that's really unfair for everyone, but it's just how things are. So I don't blame anyone for trying to cheat the system, for trying to do more and succeed. Believe me, I understand you, I get it. I've been on the internet for over 14 years now and it's been exhausting. I've had so many of my work stolen, reposted, taken down, and my accounts have performed best when I branched out of my usual content and started creating reels. It's actually how I found out that I actually enjoy doing that, but artists shouldn't have to do all of that just to be able to share their work. It's not fair. So believe me when I say I am on your side. I can see why doing things this way would be tempting, so I need you to know something very important. Social media's expectations for artists shouldn't dictate your artistic journey at its core. And for all of the ambitious artists out there who are willing to fight the algorithm, who are willing to try and prevail by any means necessary, I want you to answer me when I ask you this. If we take away the algorithm, the social media, the bullying, the false expectations, and imagine a perfect world in which you can create without limits and the need for crutches, what do you have left? What is your art to you? What does it mean for you to create? What will you have left once the lights go out and once the curtains close? What's the legacy you will leave behind? I need you to understand one thing. We're all rooting for you. We're telling you that you shouldn't have to meet those ridiculous standards anymore just to create. We're telling you that it's okay to take your time to improve. We're saying that there's nothing wrong with taking extra time to create your piece. There's nothing wrong with your art looking off or crooked or weird. You shouldn't feel ashamed of it to the point where you're using shortcuts to avoid confronting it. It's okay to be bad. We've all been there. It's human. And in the age where there is so much fear surrounding AI, we need more human artwork. When someone tells you to study, they're not being elitist. They're not saying that your art can't exist if it's bad. They're telling you that you have to be bad first so you can improve. That you should allow yourself to make those mistakes. I promise you, we want you to succeed. Since when was the requirement for doing art the end result looking good? Know that this advice is all coming from a good place, from people who care about you, not people who wanna shame you, because there's no shame in not knowing how to do something. And to the people who have been attacking these people mindlessly and shaming them, you're the ones who should be ashamed of yourselves. Since when has it ever been okay to bring someone down while they're trying to actively improve and grow? These things aren't a given. They need to be taught and learned. Rolling your eyes and being upset at people when they make mistakes and trying to cancel them and shame them at every corner is getting old. You need to do better. We're starting to argue about some very old fundamental things that have been staples in the art community, because at some point art became more about entertainment and chasing that creative high and the algorithm than about the actual effort, and I hope I don't have to explain why arguing and running in circles isn't going to help anyone. Stop trying to put people down. I still struggle with imposter syndrome, and this is why this conversation is so important to me. If this type of nuanced discussion was happening back when I needed it, I think that I would have internalized it all a lot sooner, and I would be thriving by now. But instead, it took me years to even begin to unlearn the shame of using references in my art. We as a community have to do better and lift each other up. I remember when the art community was such a warm and welcoming place for beginners. What happened to anyone can cook? Be bad, be messy, make mistakes. There's no shame in learning. There's no shame in trying to grow. Owning what you are is a million times more admirable than hiding behind something you think you should be. Remember who you are, weird art kid. If by the end of this you're still thinking,
I don't care, I'm gonna do what I want.
Okay, good. That's all fine and sweet, but then you have to acknowledge that you're not gonna be a part of this conversation anymore. If you're just going to yell at the other side and preach about how you're so right and they're so wrong, and then put your hands over your ears and go la 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 when they try to respond to you and try to explain their side to you, then don't expect your opinion to be considered in the future. If you're refusing to engage with the conversation, then there simply won't be one when it comes to you. Put your phone down and sit this one out. If you're not going to engage productively, don't try to dictate the direction of this conversation as if you care about the outcome of it. We're just going to be running in circles. Once again, to bring all of these points together, at the end of the day, ArtFight's rule on tracing isn't a rule on what you can and can't do in general. It's about what's allowed in an event that functions under specific conditions. Using these techniques is not in the spirit of ArtFight at its core, where the point isn't to be the best, the shiniest, or the fastest. It's to showcase your ability as an artist. If that ability exists within you, this wouldn't be a limitation to you. You're not being told not to reference. Your hands are not tied. Also, I just thought it was worth mentioning that people were upset about some of the rules being kind of open-ended, I guess, but ultimately left to mod discretion. And the reason certain things are left up to the mods just proves the whole point of this video. There are nuances to the rules set in place. This whole conversation is a lot more nuanced than it's treated as. It's ridiculous how we have to constantly re-explain these basic concepts. Blaming the ArtFight mods for not making the rules clear is a bit odd in my opinion, because it would be impossible for them to individually police each and every way in which you could use and abuse these methods, so it's simply easier for them to use an umbrella rule rather than allow people to even try to exploit these loopholes. And since this rule is not new, we can rightfully assume that their need to update it in this way just means that that's probably exactly what's been happening. The rule was vague enough for people to try and exploit the loopholes, and so they did that to the point where the mods thought it was necessary to put their foot down. I'm not sure why we're all just pretending like this was pulled out of thin air, or why we think that the ArtFight staff suddenly became possessed by the spirit of a 2013 DeviantArt purist. And here's the best part. If you're still unhappy with the rules, even after reading into all of this, and even after everything I just told you, you don't have to participate. Yes, you heard that right. If you're no longer happy with how ArtFight works, even though right now it's working virtually the same as it always has, then you don't have to do it. You can choose to be free. Just do keep in mind that this is fully on you, not the ArtFight staff. The best part about this event is that it's completely optional and no one is affected whether you participate or not. Bullying people to get your way, however, does have an impact on others, and if not being able to trace is making your blood boil to the point where you want to relentlessly harass people, then just sit this one out. Go outside, touch some grass, do whatever you need to do, but for the love of God, don't harass people. If you're still saying that you could do all of the above but you just don't want to because you feel like you shouldn't have to, then you don't have to participate. It's truly that simple. Why are you acting like anyone has to accommodate what is, according to you, a completely optional step of your process? Maybe it's because it's actually a little more than that. I don't know. Just some food for thought. But yeah, to get back to the point, approach these topics with curiosity and be kind to one another. If your first impulse is to argue, I'm gonna tell you right now that I'm not gonna entertain that. Either be respectful and participate in the conversation or get out. I'm getting tired of people thinking they can just bully their way through everything. You're not entitled to anyone's time and patience, and people can refuse to interact with you if you're going to refuse to be respectful. So, what did we learn? Well, hopefully at least something. But when it comes to ArtFight, at the end of the day, they have the full right to moderate their event in any way that allows them to do so more easily. If this bothers you, there are plenty of other challenges with no restrictions to them in which you can participate freely. Trying to strongarm and boycott an event that's always been so open to working with the art community is not gonna get us anywhere. Do I think the mods should roll back the changes? No, especially not since they've existed for a while now. I don't believe these rules are infringing on anyone directly, and if you feel like they are, even after watching this video, maybe reevaluate why that is. Because at the end of the day, no one is forbidding you from drawing, and no one is coming to take away your pencil. No one is trying to make you feel bad either, so think about what you're really upset about. Learning to take critique is a valuable skill, and having difficult conversations and admitting your flaws is admirable. I invite you to share your takes in the comments below. Respectfully. Overall, I believe ArtFight did a good job extending the rules, and that the complaints people have are really about a deeper problem within the art community that people have been too quiet about. I tried to be as broad as possible in this video to cover as many talking points as I could, whilst also going into a bit of detail on them, so it's possible that even if you recognize yourself in one of these points, that doesn't mean that all of them apply to you. Hell, maybe none of them do. So if you heard me say something that you don't agree with because it doesn't describe you personally, then I clearly wasn't talking about you. Just keep that in mind and be respectful if you're going to engage with these topics. Anyway, we ended up quite far away from where we originally started, but I think this was a conversation that was long overdue. I grew up in this community and it means the world to me, and I hate that we've come to a point where we've become so ready to get so viscerally upset about every little thing to the point where it's ruining the fun for everyone. Also, people playing the victim while attacking others really pisses me off. Y'all can't just be running around doing fuck all and then expect people not to say anything back to you. I know some people are trying to be stubborn and contrarian on purpose and like, whatever girl. If you just wanna argue, we're not gonna do this. Just stop trying to create drama and have a normal conversation for once in your life. No one is coming for you. They're not gonna come get you. Stop being the boogeyman underneath your own bed. And most importantly, please behave. I tried to cover a lot of the points and concerns from the discourse in this video, so it's possible that some details got lost in translation. This is why I'll say, again, that you should take everything I said in this video with a grain of salt. Use critical thinking and chew on what was said. Please be kind and respectful to each other, approach each other with curiosity, and don't try to put other people down. And for the people who felt called out in this video, no one's goal is to shame you, and if it is, we don't claim them. The art community has always been about lifting each other up and helping each other improve, and believe me, we all want you to thrive. So don't immediately jump to being defensive. Try to understand where we're coming from. Try to see how what you're doing impacts not only you, but others, including beginners who might look up to you, and might pick up on the wrong ideas that'll hurt them in the long run. Let's all be mindful of what we're saying and doing. Anyway, I've been Milk. What will I be tomorrow? Who knows? I guess you'll have to stick around and find out with me. I hope this video was helpful and can serve to clear the air around this whole discussion, at least in part. Thank you so much for watching, and remember,